I want to share a meditation technique that's really useful for dealing with stress or anxiety or moments where you feel like you're under a lot of pressure. This practice is called floating noting, and it's adapted from a technique that originated in Burma in the early 20th century. It's a really powerful technique, but it's also really easy to do and easy to understand. So the way that you do this technique is pretty simple. Now, most meditation techniques involve some sort of an anchor that you rest your attention on. For instance, the breath, right? You bring your attention to the breath, then when it wanders, you notice that and bring it back. This practice is not like that. In this practice, you don't use any sort of anchor, and instead you just let your attention kind of float, hence the term floating noting, right? So when you don't deliberately put your attention somewhere, it's just going to naturally kind of drift from object to object. So it might drift over to something that you're looking at, something might catch your eye, right? Or then there might be a sound, and then your attention moves to that sound. Now, all you do with this practice is you just notice where your attention is, what's sort of standing out in your awareness in any given moment, and then you apply a light mental label to it. So if what grabs your attention is something that you see, something visual, then you apply the light mental label seeing, right? You say in your head, not out loud, you just say lightly, seeing. And if what grabs your attention, if your attention floats over to a sound, then you can probably guess, you label that hearing, right? And then if what stands out in your awareness is some sort of sensation in your body, you label that feeling. And then if what stands out is some sort of a mental object, a thought, a worry, a plan, a memory, anything like that, you label it thinking. Okay? So those are the labels: seeing, hearing, feeling, thinking. And what you're going to do is you're going to find sort of a nice rhythm, and I'll explain what that means. You find a nice rhythm, and then in each sort of moment in this rhythm, you just label what your current experience is, what's standing out in your awareness. So I'll give you an example so you know what I mean. If I were to do this practice out loud, instead of in my head, which is the way that you really do it, if I were to do it out loud, it would be something like this: hearing, seeing, seeing, feeling, thinking, seeing, seeing, hearing. See, like that. So I just sort of found a groove, and in this rhythmic way, I would just notice what is predominating in my awareness, what my attention is on in that moment, and then label it. So that's really the whole practice. It's pretty easy. I guess the question might come up though, why do this, right? Why is this practice like this? What's the point of it? So what this practice is for, what it helps us do, is stay with our present moment experience instead of resisting it or flinching away from it. Because we have this tendency, when we get stressed, when we get anxious, our experience becomes kind of unpleasant, right? And our natural tendency is to resist that unpleasant feeling, to flinch away from it or avoid it somehow. And both the mindfulness tradition and modern psychology agree that this natural tendency to flinch away actually makes things worse. It just compounds and prolongs our stress or our anxiety. And what works much better, what actually takes a lot of the sting out of these experiences, is to just be with the experience as it arises. Whatever's happening in the present moment, just let yourself experience it without flinching away, without trying to change it. Just accept it as it is. It's a little counterintuitive, but it really works. And so this practice helps us do that, because when unpleasant sensations arise in our body, sort of anxious feelings in our gut or something like that, you just label it feeling, right? You don't resist it or flinch away from it or start thinking in your mind about how terrible it is. You just go feeling and then on to the next moment, right? And there's this other unfortunate thing that we do, which is when we get anxious or stressed, we tend to ruminate. We dive headfirst into our anxious thoughts and spin out these long negative stories, right? This practice helps with that too, because when a thought comes up, instead of grabbing onto it and spinning it out into this long chain, you just label it thinking. Boom, on to the next moment, right? On to the next label. So it helps us avoid these two unhelpful extremes of, on the one hand, flinching away from what we're feeling, or on the other hand, diving headfirst into what we're thinking and churning out these long stories. So that's why this practice is so useful. By labeling in this way, it helps us stay with and accept the present moment, whatever it contains. Okay? Now, there are two ways you can use this practice. One is as a formal meditation. So if you have a daily meditation practice, you can just do this as your daily meditation on some days or on all days if you like, right? Just in the morning or whenever you do it, you sit down for 10 minutes and you do floating noting. If you don't have a daily meditation practice, by the way, I really suggest you get one because it's super helpful. So you can do this as a formal practice, or you can do this practice kind of on the go. Whenever you find yourself in the course of your day getting stressed out or anxious or overwhelmed, you can do 30 seconds of floating noting, a minute of floating noting, right? Just real quick to help tune into the present moment and break that habit of flinching away or resisting or ruminating, right? So that's the practice in a nutshell. I want to give just a couple more notes on it. There are questions that I often receive about this practice, so I figure I'll just answer those in case you guys have those questions. One is, should my eyes be open or closed? The answer is whichever one you feel like. I do it eyes open sometimes, eyes closed sometimes. Of course, if your eyes are closed, you're probably not going to be labeling seeing very much. It'll mostly just be hearing, feeling, thinking. Although sometimes you can label the visual image of, sort of behind your closed eyes. But generally you won't be labeling seeing so much, but that's fine. So open or closed, up to you. Another question is, what if I seem to be noticing two things at the same time and I don't know which one to label? Like maybe there's a thought in my head and I'm seeing something. The answer to that is pick one. Then the follow-up question is, how do I pick one? Which one do I pick? The answer is randomly. It honestly doesn't matter, just pick one, okay? Another question is, what if I don't really know in a given moment what I'm experiencing or what's standing out in my awareness? I'm just uncertain. The answer is note uncertainty. So I'm giving you another note, all right? So now you have seeing, hearing, feeling, thinking, and uncertainty. So if the moment comes and you're just like, I don't know, perfect. Just note uncertainty, all right? And then the final question that I want to cover is, what if the same object is dominating my experience over an extended period of time? So say there's a sound, for instance, and my attention is sort of fixed on the sound for a long period. What do I do? The answer is just keep noting that. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with your noting session sounding kind of like this. Hearing, 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 hearing. That's perfect. You're doing it exactly right. And then if your attention moves to something else, note that other thing. If your attention stays on the sound, just keep noting hearing until it moves. It's totally okay. All right? So that's the floating noting practice. Give it a try, and I hope you find it useful.